What if I told you that everything you were taught about debt was a lie designed to keep you poor? What if the very thing you are told to avoid at all costs is exactly what billionaires and Wall Street elites use to build massive, generational wealth? Completely tax-free? You have been conditioned since childhood to believe that debt is a trap. You have been told that the ultimate American dream is to pay off your mortgage, cut up your credit cards, become entirely debt-free, and then slowly sell off your retirement accounts while handing over a massive chunk of your life's work to the IRS. But the wealthiest families in the world play a completely different game. They know a secret, a heavily guarded, perfectly legal wealth building framework that completely eliminates capital gains taxes and allows them to live a life of absolute financial freedom without ever cashing out their investments. Today, I am going to pull back the curtain on what insiders call the buy, borrow, die strategy. I am going to show you exactly how this system works, step by step, and how it can literally save your family $500,000 or more in taxes over your lifetime. This is the exact strategy that makes the rich richer while the hardworking middle class gets absolutely crushed by the tax system. And more importantly, I am going to show you how you can start applying these exact same principles to your own life right now in 2026, regardless of where you are starting from. You cannot afford to miss a single second of this, because understanding this one concept will fundamentally change the way you look at money, debt, and wealth forever. Think about how we are taught to handle money from the time we get our very first paycheck. The script is always the same. Go to school, get a good job, trade your time for a salary, save a portion of that salary, and pay off your debts as fast as humanly possible. If you are really responsible, you put your money into a 401k or a brokerage account and let it grow. And then, one day, when you are 65 years old and ready to retire, you start selling off those investments to pay for your life. You sell your stock, you pay the capital gains tax, and you live on whatever is left over. This is the conventional path. This is what financial advisors tell you to do. But this path has a massive, glaring flaw that quietly drains your wealth. Every time you sell a successful investment, you trigger a taxable event. The government steps in and takes a massive cut of your profits, drastically reducing the amount of money you actually get to keep and interrupting the compounding growth of your portfolio. The wealthy understand that paying taxes is the single biggest expense you will ever face in your lifetime. If you want to build true, lasting wealth, you have to learn how to legally minimize that expense. And the way they do it is by completely changing their relationship with debt. To understand this, you have to understand the fundamental difference between how the middle class views debt and how the wealthy view debt. For the average person, debt is consumer debt. It is a credit card balance with a 25% interest rate used to buy a television. That goes down in value the second you take it out of the box. It is a massive car loan for a vehicle that depreciates every single mile you drive it. That kind of debt is absolutely toxic. It is financial suicide. But the wealthy do not use debt to buy liabilities. They use debt as a tool to acquire and hold onto appreciating assets. They understand that in the eyes of the IRS, borrowed money is not income. Let me say that again, because it is the entire foundation of this strategy. Borrowed money is not taxable income. When you take out a loan, you do not pay income tax on that money because you have to pay it back. It is a liability on your personal balance sheet, not revenue. Wall Street figured out a long time ago that if you can borrow money against the assets you already own, you can get all the cash you need to live a luxurious lifestyle without ever triggering a taxable event. This concept was popularized in the 1990s by a law professor named Edward McCaffrey, who coined the phrase buy, borrow, die. It sounds a little morbid, I know, but it is the most accurate description of how wealth actually works at the highest levels. Let us break down exactly how this works. Starting with phase 1, which is the buy phase. This is the foundation of everything. You cannot use this strategy if you do not own high quality, appreciating assets. The wealthy do not hold their net worth in cash. Cash is a guaranteed loss because of inflation. Over time, your purchasing power is constantly being eroded. Instead, the wealthy convert their cash into assets that grow in value and produce cash flow over time. We are talking about prime real estate, index funds, blue chip stocks, and profitable businesses. The goal in this phase is accumulation. You want to buy assets and never let them go. You want to let the magic of compound interest work uninterrupted for decades. Every time you sell an asset, you stop the compounding process and hand 20 to 30% of your growth over to the government. So the rule in phase 1 is simple. You buy and you hold. You let your money make babies, and then you let those babies make babies. You build a massive fortress of equity over your working years. For the average person watching this, this is your investment portfolio, your real estate properties, or the equity you have built up in your own business. Now we move into phase 2, which is the borrow phase. This is where the magic happens and where most people get entirely lost. Let us say you have spent 20 or 30 years diligently buying assets. You have built a beautiful portfolio. Let us imagine you bought $500,000 worth of investments over your lifetime. And because you held onto them and let them compound, that portfolio is now worth $2.5 million today. You are a multi-millionaire on paper. You have $2 million in pure, unrealized capital gains. Now you want to retire. You want to buy a beach house. You want to travel the world. Or maybe you want to give your kids some money to start their own businesses. The traditional financial advice tells you to start selling off your portfolio. So you sell part of your investments to get the cash. But the moment you hit the sell button, you trigger the IRS tripwire. Let us run the actual numbers on this, because this is where the $500,000 tax secret comes into play. If you sell that portfolio to access your cash, you have to pay taxes on the $2 million of profit at the federal level. Long-term capital gains are taxed at 20% for high earners. Then you have the net investment income tax, which adds another 3.8%. And depending on what state you live in, you could easily be paying another 5 to 10% in state income taxes. In many places, your effective tax rate on those gains is going to be roughly 25% or more. 25% of your $2 million profit is exactly $500,000. You are literally writing a check for $500,000 to the government just for the privilege of accessing your own money. That is $500,000 that is permanently removed from your family's legacy. It will never compound again. It will never grow. It is gone forever. But what if you played by Wall Street's rules? What if you used the borrow phase? Instead of selling your assets and triggering that massive tax bill, you walk into your brokerage firm or your bank and you say, I have $2.5 million in secure, liquid assets. I do not want to sell them, but I need $1 million in cash to live my life. The bank looks at your assets and says, absolutely, they will set up something called a securities-backed line of credit, or an SBLOC. This is a revolving credit line, kind of like a credit card, but it is secured by your investment portfolio. Because the loan is backed by very safe, liquid assets, the bank takes almost no risk. If you do not pay them back, they can just take your stocks. Because the risk is so incredibly low, the interest rate they charge you is also extremely low. It is often far lower than a mortgage or a personal loan. So you borrow the $1 million. Remember the golden rule. Borrowed money is not taxable income. You pay exactly $0 in taxes on that $1,000,000. You completely bypass the $500,000 tax bill. But wait, you might be thinking, I have to pay interest on that loan. Right, how does that make sense? This is where the math gets absolutely beautiful. Let us say the bank charges you 6% interest on your $1,000,000 loan. That means you owe $60,000 a year in interest. But remember, you did not sell your $2.5 million portfolio. It is still fully invested in the market. Historically, the stock market returns an average of 8 to 10% per year over the long term. So your $2.5 million portfolio is growing by roughly $200 to $250,000 a year in average market conditions. Your portfolio is literally generating more than enough wealth to pay the interest on the loan, while still growing in size. You are borrowing at 6% and earning at 9%. You are capturing the spread. You are using the bank's money to fund your life. Your own money is still growing, and you still haven't paid a single dime in capital gains tax. If you are starting to see the matrix and realize how the financial system actually works for the wealthy, do me a quick favor and hit that like button. It really helps push this information out to more everyday people who need to hear it. And if you want to keep learning how to build wealth the right way, make sure you are subscribed because we dive deep into these exact strategies every single week. No fluff, just real actionable math. Now, let us continue with the strategy because we have only covered the buy and the borrow phases. You might be wondering, what happens to that giant loan? You have to pay it back eventually, right? Does the debt just keep growing forever until it consumes your entire net worth? This brings us to the final, most controversial, and most powerful part of the entire framework. Phase 3, die. This is the ultimate tax loophole that Wall Street billionaires use to pass on generational wealth. When you pass away, your debts do not magically disappear. Your estate is still responsible for paying off that loan. But the tax code has a provision that is so incredibly generous to wealthy asset holders that it almost feels illegal, even though it is completely within the rules. It is called the step up in basis. When you die and pass your assets onto your heirs, the IRS resets the taxable value of those assets to whatever they are worth on the day you die. Let us go back to our example. You bought the assets for $500,000. When you pass away many years later, let us say that portfolio has grown to $5 million. If you had sold it while you were alive, you would owe taxes on $4.5 million of profit. But because you held onto the assets until you died, the IRS steps up the basis for your children. In the eyes of the government, it is as if your children bought the portfolio today for $5 million. All of those decades of capital gains, all of that explosive growth, is completely wiped clean from the tax ledger. The tax liability vanishes into thin air. Your heirs inherit the $5 million portfolio, and they can immediately sell off exactly enough of it to pay back the bank loan. Because the basis was stepped up, they pay zero capital gains tax when they sell. They pay off the debt, and they pocket the remaining millions, entirely tax-free. You lived a rich life using borrowed money. Your investments continued to compound uninterrupted, and your family inherited the wealth without surrendering half of it to the federal government. You literally beat the system. You died with debt, and the debt saved you hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of dollars. Right now, as we navigate through 2026, we are in a very unique window of time that makes this strategy more critical than ever. The federal estate tax exemption, which dictates how much money you can pass on before the death tax kicks in, is historically massive. Currently, it sits at around $15 million per individual, or roughly $30 million for a married couple. That means unless your estate is worth more than $30 million, you do not have to worry about the federal estate tax eating into your legacy. You get the step up in basis. You wipe out the capital gains. And your family keeps the fortune. This is the exact playbook used by real estate moguls who refinance their properties constantly to pull out tax-free cash. It is the playbook used by tech billionaires who take a $1 annual salary but live like kings by borrowing against their company stock. They do not need a paycheck because they understand that cash flow from debt is superior to cash flow from taxable income. Now, I want to be extremely clear about something, because I am not telling you this to encourage you to run out and take reckless loans against your life savings. This strategy is incredibly powerful, but it is a double-edged sword. It requires discipline, emotional control, and a deep understanding of risk management. The biggest risk with the buy, borrow, die strategy is something called a margin call. When you borrow against your investments, the bank requires you to maintain a certain level of equity. If the stock market crashes, like we saw with the extreme volatility in 2022 and 2023, the value of your collateral drops. If it drops too far, the bank will panic. They will call you and demand that you either deposit more cash immediately, or they will forcefully sell your assets at the worst possible time to pay off the loan. When the bank force sells your assets, you not only lock in massive losses at the bottom of the market, but you also trigger the very capital gains taxes you were trying to avoid in the first place. It is a catastrophic scenario that can wipe out decades of hard work in a matter of days. This is why the wealthy are incredibly conservative when they execute this strategy. They do not borrow 90% of their portfolio's value. They usually cap their borrowing at 15 to 25% of their total assets. If you have a $2 million portfolio and you only borrow $300,000, the stock market would have to drop by 70 or 80% before you even come close to a margin call. You build in a massive buffer of safety. You ensure that no matter what the global economy does, no matter what panic hits Wall Street, you will never be forced to sell your assets against your will. This strategy is not for people living paycheck to paycheck, and it is not for people who want to gamble on speculative investments. It is for people who have diligently built wealth in broad, diversified, stable assets and want to optimize their tax efficiency over a timeline of decades. So how does the everyday person, the person watching this who maybe doesn't have a $5 million stock portfolio yet, actually apply these concepts? The beauty of this framework is that the underlying philosophy scales down just as well as it scales up. You do not need to be a billionaire to stop unnecessarily volunteering to pay taxes. The easiest and most common way middle-class families execute a version of this strategy is through real estate. If you own a home that has appreciated significantly in value, you have unrealized capital gains. Instead of selling the house to get access to that equity, which involves paying massive real estate agent commissions, closing costs, and potentially taxes, you can use a home equity line of credit or a cash-out refinance. You borrow against the equity in your home. That cash is completely tax-free. You can use it to renovate the property to increase its value further, or you can use it as a down payment to buy a rental property that generates monthly income. You hold on to the real estate until you die. Your kids inherit the properties with a stepped-up basis, and you have successfully executed the strategy. You can also apply this mindset to your standard brokerage accounts. If you have an emergency that requires cash, instead of immediately selling your best performing stocks and triggering a tax bill, you can look into taking a small margin loan against your portfolio. As long as you keep the loan amount very small relative to your total account size, and as long as you have a clear plan to pay off the interest, it can be a mathematically superior move compared to realizing a massive capital gain. The key takeaway here is to fundamentally shift your mindset from being a consumer to being an asset manager. You have to stop viewing your wealth purely in terms of how much cash is sitting in your checking account. and start viewing your wealth in terms of the assets you control and the leverage you can safely deploy. We live in a financial system that is explicitly designed to reward owners and heavily penalize earners. The tax code is not a series of punishments. It is a map of incentives. The government wants you to invest in companies, so they give capital gains favorable treatment compared to W-to-wage income. The government wants you to provide housing, so they offer incredible tax depreciation benefits to real estate investors. And the government respects the nature of debt as a liability, which creates this massive loophole for borrowing against depreciated assets. When you understand the rules of the game, you stop getting angry at the system and you start playing to win. The $500,000 tax secret is not some shady, offshore Cayman Islands scheme. It is literally just basic math applied to the existing rules of our banking and tax infrastructure. The most dangerous thing you can do for your financial future is blindly follow the advice that was designed to keep the working class working. The advice to never take on any debt whatsoever, to keep all your money in a savings account earning 1%, and to happily pay 30% of your wealth to the IRS every time you want to make a move. That is the script for mediocrity. If you want to build a fortress of wealth that outlasts you, that changes the trajectory of your family's future for generations, you have to do what the wealthy do. You acquire unshakable assets. You hold them with an iron grip through market turbulence. You strategically use leverage to access the value of those assets without triggering taxable events. And you let the step up in basis wash away your tax liabilities when you are gone. It takes time to build the foundation required to execute this at a high level. You have to put in the reps. You have to save. You have to invest. And you have to be patient. But knowing the end game changes how you play the opening moves. Now that you know the buy, borrow, die strategy exists, every financial decision you make from this day forward should be viewed through this lens. Ask yourself, am I triggering an unnecessary tax? Am I interrupting the compounding of my wealth? Is there a way to use strategic, low-risk debt to accomplish my goal while keeping my assets intact? If you start asking those questions, you are already thinking like the top 1%. You are taking control of your financial destiny. Implement these principles. Stay disciplined. Manage your risk. And watch how quickly your wealth begins to multiply when the drag of taxation is finally lifted off your shoulders. Keep learning, keep investing, and I will see you in the next one.